How important is communication as a leader? Well, actually, if you look at leaders, usually what sets good leaders apart is how well they communicate. And so we thought we'd look at a number of different events that have happened across the news cycle in the last week or so to be able to look at how different leaders have approached communication, whether it be communication in the face of an emergency, whether it be communication in the face of trying to inspire people, whether it be trying to challenge or negotiate, or there's so many different ways of we as leaders need to communicate. And no, it's not when we talk about communication, it's not just about becoming a professional speaker and speaking on stage in front of people. That's probably one of the very small parts of communication as a leader. Very, very small, although there seems to be way too much emphasis on it. It's the everyday interactions we have with the people we're leading. It's how we're inspiring them, how we give them vital information, how we give them feedback, how we respond to their communications, how we deal with emergencies and dangerous situations, these things like that. Like how we actually communicate in those moments is what sets us apart as a leader. And so we want to look at a number of those events today. And before I get into that, let's welcome Dr. Rod Sate-Hill, the business pastor. Thank you once again for sharing your wisdom with us, Dr. Rod.
G'day, Craig. Well, you make my day. I love the way you introduced me, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. So, look, you and I have had many conversations about communication. Obviously, many years ago, I specialized in helping people develop keynote presentations and become better professional speakers. And I knew that was a very key part in me being able to help leaders is that communication part. But I realized that so much of those communication skills weren't just for stage, they were for our everyday interactions. And you obviously, Dr. Rod, we communicate here on this podcast, and it kind of like appears like we're on a stage and we're on a platform, but this is not leadership. I mean, it's a very small part of leadership. It's how after this, I jump on a call with my team and manage them, and it's how I manage them, how I communicate tasks and everything like that. You've had a bit of a unique experience with communication as far as teaching. Obviously, as a university lecturer, how would you place the importance of communication, or your style of communication? How have you found you've been challenged in that? Obviously, people like badmouth lecturers, like, oh, he's a lecturer. How have you been challenged in that and adapted to improve your communication as a leader?
Well, I think one of the first things I learned was that I cannot expect everybody to be listening to me at any one point in time.
That's good.
And look, at university level, lectures usually timed around 50 minutes with a little break, and then you might be scheduled to teach a class for 2 hours or 3 hours. There's no way in this wide world that people are going to be able to listen to you for the whole of that time. So I kind of figure that at any particular point in time, about a third of my audience are not actually tuned in and listening to me. So as a communicator, I ensure that I repeat the important parts 2 or 3 times, but also that I communicate in slightly different ways. So in my field of economics, you may well communicate initially by explaining some theory, but you may be able to communicate the same ideas by reference to a practical example.
Yeah.
I think what we have to understand with communication, without actually giving a whole lecture on it, is that there's always a sender,
yes,
and there's a receiver.
That's really good.
And in the case of a classroom lecture or an online lecture, there are numerous receivers. Mm-hmm. And the intended meaning on the part of the sender sometimes gets quite scrambled.
Yes.
On the part of the receiver, because the receiver is actually going to filter that communication through their own experience, their own worldview, their own prejudices. So we can end up actually miscommunicating. And we need to bear that in mind, that somebody might receive our communication in a way that we didn't anticipate. But, we've really got to be open to that. And I think the other really important thing is communication is actually two-way. And lectures are not always a really good means of communication, because there is a tendency for the lecturer, in a sense, to take on the role of the expert and to assume that everybody in the audience is a sponge.
Yes.
And the sponge merely soaks up the wisdom that you share. So we've got to get away from that idea of communication. It is a two-way thing. And when we're in a one-on-one or a small group situation, it's always a good idea to say, well, what have we, what conclusion have we come to, or where are we at with this particular piece of information? Keep checking back with your audience to ensure that they've understood what you're communicating in the way that you intended, because it doesn't always end up that way.
That's really good. Yeah, because there's a sender, there's a receiver, but then there's a response. And that's where I think that a lot of leaders actually fall down, is they're really good at sending the instruction or the direction or the task or whatever, but they fail to make sure that they receive the correct response, to make sure that the receiver has actually received the right message. And as a lecturer, okay, you can't be. Obviously, the exams is when you kind of receive your response, to know if they're doing right. But even in that moment, remember, it's not always verbal. There's a lot of body language, like you were saying. About 30% aren't paying attention, and you'd probably know that because you were looking around the room and you saw body language that was showing that 30% of people were not actually paying attention. And so, yeah, I think that's key. Is when we communicate as leaders, remember there's a sender, which is us sending information. There's a receiver that receives the information, but there's also then a response. And that response is how we as a leader gauge the fact that did I actually communicate this effectively? Because as Dr. Rod said, there's many levels of miscommunication. But there's also, communication isn't just, that's not the end of communication. Communication is continuous. Communication is continuous. You send, they receive, they respond, you receive, you respond, and it should just be secular. And there should be constant levels of communication. And actually, we'll see a lot of that in our subjects for today. So talking about our subjects, let's jump into our topics that we're talking about today. Let's talk a little bit more about F1. Let's talk about Max Verstappen this time. I thought it was really interesting. I was watching the F1 on the weekend, or highlights of it, and it really stood out to me how Max responded to a really bad qualifying session, right? And I know he's really competitive. Look, he is now, that's 8 in a row for him. And I think that's 12 in a row for Red Bull now for this season. And he's just winning these races not by a margin, but by 30 seconds plus he's winning these races by. So he's in. It is an incredible time to watch F1 at the moment. Although some say it's not as entertaining, but actually the second tier teams are now actually there's actually a really decent battle going on in second place. But we're in this amazing era of seeing a once in a lifetime kind of opportunity with what Max is doing. But what actually sets him apart, and someone actually, I think it was his, I don't know, I can't remember whether it was a reporter labeled him as that, or a reporter reported that his team manager said that he's white hot, right? And he's white hot in everything he does. He's not just, like, he's so competitive, even though he's so far ahead in the championship. They've won pretty much every race this year. Like they're just so far ahead. He's so competitive. that even in a bad qualifying, he's still mad and wants better results. So they qualified, there was knockouts and everything like that to go through to the last qualifying session, and he was last place, right? He just made it into the last session, and so he actually came in, and so there was a bit of a rude outburst that I heard, which we'll go over it a little bit. And I got that on a bit of an update, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. Went back about my day, and then later on, I saw another update of then at the end of actually it was the next day after the race, actually at the end of the qualifying, he then responded and apologized. And I thought to myself, like, it's interesting that yes, a leader, sometimes we can go off, right? Sometimes we can go off, but to be able to see him apologize, that really stood out to me. That was like, that's interesting that he's man enough to apologize. But let me take you through the detail of kind of what he said with the beeps. Right, I'm not going to play it, but it was a little bit we need to censor it, right? Because he was excited, let's say. So Max turned around at the end of the thing. He said, "I should have pushed for 2 laps in a row, like I said." He's saying like, "I told you so. I told you so. I was right." Now, his manager, then chief engineer, GP, then responded, "But you're through, Max. It's like you made it through. Why are you so mad? We made it through." And this, he's so competitive. He's like, "Yeah, I don't care. If I'm in P10, it's the execution that was terrible." I'm softening why I'm translating a little bit of what he said. And then, so I think that actually, let me kind of, there's a few points in this. There's a lot in this. And I think that there's 2 leadership positions that I think we can look at here. One is Max being a leader himself. Although he's just a driver, he's kind of like a leader in the team that people look up to. And then his chief engineer is kind of his leader, his boss, but they have this really great relationship. And it's really great to see that, sometimes when you're leading someone, they can get upset, right? Sometimes they can get frustrated with the results, frustrated with how things go. And he just responded by saying, just the facts of like, yeah, but you're through, right? Like, isn't that all that matters? And then he goes on to then respond to Max after going, yeah, it was a terrible execution. He then goes, okay. And then if the track was 2 seconds quicker for your final lap and you didn't have the energy left, how would it have gone down? Right? So he's kind of coming back at him with facts and responding to him with facts. But what I love, what he does next is what I absolutely love. He tries to he responds to the aggression and the frustration with facts, like trying to bring Max down to reality. You've qualified, but if we had have done that, then we wouldn't have had any energy left to do it. And then he responds this, "But you tell me what you want to do in Q3. Let me know. Sets, fuel, run plan, like whatever you want, you tell me." So, he's responding to Max going frustrated. If you had done what I said, then we would have done better. He's like, well, you're through, and maybe if we hadn't have, there's these other conditions. But you know what? If you think you know best, you tell me what you want. And so, Dr. Rotter, I really liked this interaction from Max and GP, his chief engineer, of there's let's call it heated debate, and they're both kind of standing their ground, but GP ends up responding with this whole, that's okay, then you tell me what you want to do. How would you respond? How would you manage the communication in this situation?
I think there's a lot of lessons here. Perhaps the first is that when we get angry, when we allow our emotions to rule, the linkage between our brain and our mouth disappears altogether.
That's so good.
So, leaders are better not to allow their emotions to rule. And I know that's impossible all the time, particularly in such a charged atmosphere as a very high-speed race in a motor car. So,
Yeah.
look, I'm not critical of Verstappen at all. All I am saying is that one of the lessons we can take from this is just be careful that you don't become overcome by emotion, because it literally breaks the linkage between your brain and your mouth, and you could say things that you regret later. The second, I think, is that these guys have a good relationship to start with.
Yes, that's a
That
great
makes
point.
a
Yes.
big difference.
Yeah.
It really does. If you've got a good relationship, it's easy to forgive when somebody makes a mistake. And
Yeah, because that
that's just
frustration, because when you got relationship with someone, actually, I mean, let's make this personal. Last week, you and I were talking about something, and I got really frustrated about something, and you know me, and so you know that I'm not getting angry at you. You know who I really am, and so you didn't take that on. And so I would say that we had this very similar situation last week. I wasn't in a F1 race, but probably talking about something a little bit more important than an F1 race though. But yes, I think that afterwards I apologized to you and stuff, and I think it's true. It's because of our relationship that we have that we can get that. Now here's the thing. How can we avoid that getting the better of us? Because, if you've got relationship, you can get a little bit too familiar, and they do go back and forwards. But this is public. Their radios are public. Everyone's judging them. The rest of the team are overhearing it, and even just take out of, because obviously they've got a great relationship and all that sort of stuff, and they're winning, so they're taken with a grain of salt sometimes. But if they were losing, I wonder how different this conversation would go. But just think about it in normal workplace. There's sometimes that leaders kind of can go at each other, and we hear about that all the time. Oh yeah, the husband and wife who own the business, they're at each other all the time, or yeah, no, those two are always having a go at each other, and it does kind of bring this kind of a little bit of negative culture. So how can we make sure that we can still in that moment be raw and be able to be open and honest with each other without it actually negatively affecting the team around us?
Well, you can't unsay what you've said, so you can't actually retract words. So then you really got to go into some kind of damage control, really.
Yeah.
And I think GP's response was pretty good. The only thing is, responding with facts is not always the best way in an emotionally charged situation. So the outcome could have been a little bit different. But I think relationship makes up for a lot. And I guess people are smart enough to place a conversation or an interaction in context.
Yeah.
And so the context is the high stakes involved in motor racing, the fact that you've got to make decisions, in a split second. There's a lot of data that you have to take into account in making those decisions, and not everybody's going to make exactly the same decision at the same time, given the same information, because it's all got to happen so fast. So look, on this occasion, GP presented some data, some factual information. It turned out okay. That won't always be the case.
Yeah.
Sometimes the easiest route is to simply say, oops, I'm sorry, So I wouldn't necessarily see this as providing us a pattern or a template, but, just coming back to the fact these guys have got a good relationship. They've obviously been successful, and that diffused the situation. And of course, Verstappen himself was good enough to, really to apologise Because I
Yeah,
guess he understood the situation as well.
yeah. I want to kind of jump on a point and then get back to that. You mentioned before about being able to separate like the heat of the moment stuff. I think that that's something that I've seen good teams be able to do is in the heat of the moment. Yeah, there's some clashing and everyone's going hard, but when everything kind of settles down and outside of the the heat of the battle, so to speak, in the normalcy day to day, everyone's fine, everyone's going like there's no grudges held or whatever. And it comes back to what you were saying before is relationship. That if you've got good relationship, you can kind of go off at each other a little bit maybe in the heat of the moment, but know that because we've worked together so much, because we know each other, we know this isn't you. Just because you're going off right now, well, hopefully it's not you. If it is you, then that's a problem. You need to deal with that. If you are always going off, then that's a whole nother conversation. But I think the last thing that that GP actually said. So afterwards, Max. So at the end of the qualifying, the last qualifying session, where they got pole position, Max came in. They're doing all the congratulations over the radio, and then Max is sort of like, "Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for." He didn't want to kind of admit that he actually did. I don't think he wanted to say how bad what he did, and he's like, I'm sorry for my rant, he says. And look, all of these, I linked all the videos below if you want to go check them out and see the full conversations and everything like that, which is, there's a lot more to the story.
Just interrupting very briefly, Craig, the thing is, his audience would have understood what he meant by "I'm sorry for my rant."
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
So
exactly.
there's a lot of context here
Yes.
as well, but your point is well taken.
Yeah. But then GP's response turned around and he just said, I'm just about getting used to it. That's what he said. I'm just about getting used to it. And that kind of, it emphasizes that relationship. It's like there's an apology and it's like, I know. And look, I think that there's obviously, that's quite loaded as well, that I'm getting used to it, is like, it happens a lot. But I think that there's also an undertone of like, I know you, and I know like it's fine because I know you. We've got relationship. There's so much more. And it's interesting that they've been together for 10 years? No, what did I hear? I heard a number. They've been together since he first came across from from Toro Rosso back in. He worked with him in Toro Rosso, which is now AlphaTauri now. So yeah, they've got the history, they've got the relationship. So how do we manage communication in the heat of the moment? Relationship. That's probably the key, is how do we better communicate in the heat of the moment, is just make sure we've got relationship outside of the heat of the moment to make sure that, yes, we can manage our, we can manage our emotions in that situation. Let's make sure we also separate, what's being said from the bigger picture, as well as let's just make sure that we're building the relationship outside of the game time, really, so that then when we are going hard at it, the team actually knows us and they have a good relationship with us. So let's talk about another heated conversation. Now, this is someone who has not. My page needs to reload. Sorry. Too much advertising on that page. That's what it was. So, Will Smith. We haven't spoken about him for a hot minute. It's been a while since we've spoken about Will Smith. I thought there was quite. Look, there's a lot of actors that are speaking out right now about this SAG-AFTRA. I wanted to get that right. SAG-AFTRA. It's the Screen Actors Guild and the Actor Film that one. The movie people, Hollywood, are on strike. The writers are on strike. Everything. This is the first time in like 60 years that both the actors and the writers have struck together, and there's a lot going on. And so I thought that this would be a good point to be able to talk about how we negotiate as leaders, because at the moment there's obviously really poor negotiation going on because everyone's on strike. So it's obviously gotten to a point where communication beforehand, negotiations beforehand didn't go well, and now they've just struck. Before getting into kind of like the story and everything like that, Dr. Rod, what's your take on strikes and strike action?
Well, I would never say a strike is never justified, but generally strikes are to be avoided, in part because third parties are affected. And in other words, there's collateral damage. And I think as Christians, we should do the very best we can to avoid that. The other thing, of course, is I'm hugely biased because I believe God is my provider, not my employer, and that God is the one who's going to ensure that I prosper in a financial sense. So I'm generally against striking, but I do think that people should have the legal freedom to strike, certainly under some conditions. And I think, what we're seeing in Hollywood at the moment, I think it's the culmination of a long period where the way in which actors and writers are remunerated is no longer really appropriate given the way in which technologies have developed.
Yep.
Now, personally, I don't care if they're on strike because most of my entertainment comes from podcasts, and people like us are doing podcasts anyway.
We're still working.
So there's plenty happening. But some of the issues that are being raised by the actors, I think, and the writers are reflective of the fact technology has changed, and they see that their work is being used, but they're not being remunerated. That's one of their issues because I don't know what the situation is like in every country, but with digital television broadcasting here in Australia, we've now got access to a lot more channels, but there's only a few television companies, but we have a lot of channels. And so we're seeing repeat after repeat of very old movies and series and so on. Lots of people are watching, but the actors and writers are not being recompensed for that. So I think that's something that's worth negotiating.
Yeah.
On the other hand, one of the other issues is that Hollywood is producing garbage. And so there's not enough people
Tell us what
watching.
you really think, Dr. Rod.
Frankly, the worldview held by many in Hollywood is just plain not shared by people who live real lives in the real world and face real problems. So, there's an issue here too of the unreality of the Hollywood world, which people are just not accepting anymore because they're not going to the movies.
Yeah, and also I kind of feel like, look, I think there's two sides to every story, right? And I think there's two sides to this. One side is on the executive side of streamers, because that's kind of the main sticking point.
That's
the
the
streaming
big
contracts,
issue. Of
right?
course, that's right, yeah.
But streaming companies don't make money. They're not profitable. And so how are they meant to... The challenge is how do they manage royalties and things like that when they're not profitable, and their model isn't like TV. If there was 1,000 viewers, you knew you had $100 of advertising for that 1,000 viewers or whatever, it's quite easy to do that. But with streaming, it's not like that, because just because you've got all those viewers, I pay a Netflix subscription of $10 a month or whatever it works out to be in Australian. But, how do they know how many I'm watching, and do they then divide that $10 up amongst what I watch? And like there's all these complexities. And like I said, most of these streaming companies, actually all of them, are running at a loss. They're all running at a loss. They're only making money because of the share prices, and that's it. And that kind of brings me to one side of this conversation about communication. Is I've heard reports of the reason, one of the challenges is streaming companies don't release viewing numbers, because TV, they had to, because they say we've got 1 million viewers so that they could sell advertising. They have to say how many viewers they have. But streamers are kind of keeping that close to their chest, because that if they release that, they're afraid that that's going to affect share prices, because that's just another metric now that's probably not as good as it should be or whatever. So they're not communicating the full story, the streamers, and therefore the actors are making assumptions that, well, you're making all this money and getting all these views, when maybe they're not, right? And so I think that that's one point of contention here, is the fact that because they're not communicating, that's one thing that causes challenges, in leadership, is when you're actually not communicating. I mean, we see it all the time when in businesses, the boss, he might be stressed, he might just be closed off, he might be jaded, he might just be busy, he might just be whatever. And the boss, he or she, may not actually communicate things properly, and they may just come in and just grunt, grunt tasks and directions to people and just keep going and not actually share the full information. And it just, when we don't communicate the full story, it leaves gaps for people to be able to fill in the story with their own story. How do we, because there's a balancing act, right? Because we don't necessarily need to overshare. We obviously, Netflix and stuff, they need to protect their share prices. They need to, they need to protect themselves, because at the moment they're just on this production binge of just producing non-stop, and they're pumping money into it because they just need to, because they need to catch up with Disney and HBO and all those other streamers that just have a back catalogue of and so how do we make sure we communicate enough to people so that they're on board, but not too much that we still need to protect ourselves in our business?
Well, there's been a lot written about this. There's a lot of theory in economics about the whole of the bargaining process, and often either side doesn't really want to reveal everything because it's not in their interests. But of course, look, if the streaming services are not making money, the economist in me says, go out of business.
Yeah.
And, I think there is something of a moral case to be said for the actors and writers receiving some kind of recompense when their material is being published in this way. And in many cases, of course, at the time that the film or the series was made, nobody had any idea that technology would develop in the way it has.
Yeah.
So I think there's something of an ethical argument on the side of the actors and the writers.
Yeah.
If the streaming companies are saying, look, we can't make money out of this, go out of business. Just go out of business. This whole bargaining area is really difficult because you often don't want to reveal your whole hand because you don't want to be taken advantage of. And there's a lot of very sophisticated theory to sort of explain all this kind of thing. And there are lots of experiments done in economics too, in these kinds of areas. You get situations in which there's an unequal distribution of power and all kinds of things. So the studios, for example, are more powerful than individual actors. That's one reason why they join a guild or a union. Look, I'm happy to let this play out. Good leaders are going to look to the long term. I think what is best for the industry, so for the actors, the writers, and also the companies into the long term, not just the short term. But beyond that, there's not really a lot I can say beyond the fact, let the market sort it out. Let the market, so what signals is the market giving? Is the market giving the signal that, well, actually, we need to be producing something of better quality? Is the market saying, look, we don't really value the services of the streaming companies, in which case just go out of business. It's not something that really is contributing positively to human flourishing. So I don't know that there's much more I can add.
No, and so the other side that I think that is worthwhile talking about is sometimes in a negotiation, we can be fighting. What's the right term for it? I don't necessarily want to say fighting a losing battle, but all these actors are trying to look back of like, well, we got this many royalties from our previous stuff, and this is what we've been getting up until now, so we should earn that moving forward. It's like, well, no, the climate has changed. Things change, industries change. The whole, part of this conversation is AI and how it's going to be taking over some things. Like, yes, you just can't be paid the same amount that you used to. And I think that with what you were saying is like the quality has dropped 100%. I think that the quality has dropped, but I also feel like we as a society have become so hungry for content that I think that there's this supply and demand of, we as a society consume so much content nowadays, but now also the barrier of entry to get into creating content. I mean, look at us. We've got $60 a month, subscription to a video thing, and I mean, look, okay, I've got some expensive equipment here, but I don't need to. I mean, what we're doing right now 10 years ago would have cost $1 million to set up a studio, and we can do it for a couple of $100, right? And so the barrier of entry is much lower. And so what I kind of see the future of especially content is there's going to be a lot more people producing lower quality content, and that's just the way it is. It's like, rather than it being, actually, I think that there'll be a Marvel movie, Fast and the Furious, and what Barbie that's doing amazing at the moment. That might be a topic for another day that we might talk about. But like, you got the big name franchises that are doing these big blockbusters, and then nothing, right? Like, so I kind of feel like we're going to get to the place, because everyone's craving so much content, everyone's having to pump out so much cheap, lower quality. Not that it's bad information and poor quality in the information, but it's just not the production value, because we do this live, my team will cut it up and it'll be out in the next couple of days, and then that's it. Whereas a movie takes years to produce. And so I think that there's now the barrier of entry is low. Everyone's consuming content. I think that it's going to allow more people to make money from, let's call it, entertainment, but we're not going to have the big, massive payouts that we used to see in Hollywood. Obviously, for the big people like The Rock and Matt Damon and like all those people, obviously there'll be a select few that'll still make the big tens of millions and stuff like that. But I think that it's just going to be available for more people to kind of follow their dreams, follow their purpose of being an actor or an actress or whatever, and maybe make a decent living of $50,000 to $100,000 a year on it, rather than making millions. And I think that when this is kind of a long way around to ask this question, is all these people fighting for what used to be, but the climate's changed, where now I think that they can shoot themselves in the foot by asking for too much. So how do we find that balance of fighting for what's right, but also accepting that things have changed?
Well, look, ultimately, no matter what you think about markets do sort things out. So if at the end of the day there's an agreement which results in the actors and writers in some sense being paid too much, there'll simply be fewer opportunities. And so it'll be more and more difficult to break into the market as an actor or as a writer. Or maybe people will do as you suggest, and they'll just fall back on what they can do with whatever resources they have. And maybe they will be able to generate a reasonably decent income from that. Look, we've seen technological shifts before. Remember that song? Was it Video Killed the Radio Star?
Yes.
Video didn't kill the radio star.
No.
We still have radio. Radio is still quite popular. I mean, now everybody wants a DAB plus radio in their motor vehicle.
A what? A what?
Digital radio.
Okay. I'm like,
DAB plus.
Like, okay, I don't even know.
Look, man, you follow racing cars. I follow every man's car. Okay. I watch probably 20 or 30 car reviews every week, usually while I'm sitting down having lunch or something like that. And I'm always interested to know if you've got a DAB plus radio receiver in the car, because many do, some don't. So we still have radio. We still have free-to-air television. Not that I watch it, but it's still there. We've got cable TV. But the whole landscape is changing. And ultimately, it doesn't matter much how much interference in the market comes from, unions or from governments or whatever. Ultimately, the market sorts things out. And I happen to believe that free markets, most of the time, but not always, most of the time actually generate just outcomes. It would actually take me a long time to explain that. But when I'm teaching first-year students in university economics, at least in the Christian context, I go through how a competitive economy leads to a just price. Or just wage and just prices and so on. The reason being that a competitive market actually leaves businesses with no what we call excess profit. So they're making enough to pay all of their costs and to make a return on the risk that they take and their own input to their own finance and time and energy and entrepreneurial spirit and so on. And that seems to me to be a just outcome. So no matter what they do, ultimately, market forces end up ruling the roost. And I think that's part of God's design, actually, although I know that's not a popular view. I do think it's part of God's design.
So let me ask you about that, because I think it's beautiful, because I agree that markets will sort themselves out. So looking at ourselves as business leaders, Christian business leaders that are wanting to lead ethically and with integrity, do you suggest that markets will sort themselves out? So if you position yourself at fair market, then you will be the last man standing, so to speak, or that'll be better? Or is it best to kind of capitalize on opportunities and as the market works its way back down?
Well, look, generally, we're talking about something like this particular strike. It's a collective action, so it's a kind of there's a social process going on here. But look, we're getting into an area which is very, very complex, and maybe we should spend a whole podcast talking about this. But the markets don't always work perfectly when people haven't got, if you like, right motivation. Because we have to have an attitude that says we care about the people at the bottom of the heap. We care about the poor. We must care about actors who fall upon hard times, for example, through illness or through accident or simply through old age. Market processes themselves don't have any ethical values. It's people acting in markets that have the ethical values. So it can never be the market on its own. It's got to be the market plus what amounts to our worldview. And biblically speaking, I believe, and I think it's relatively easy to demonstrate, that the Bible does support an approach in which there's freedom for people to choose things like their wages and conditions. There's freedom to bargain over those things. but there must always be concern for what the Bible calls the poor, the orphans, the widows, the people who find, and there's lots and lots of Old Testament law that's all about protecting those who really, through no fault of their own, end up at the bottom of the heap.
Yeah.
God instituted laws concerning divorce even in the Old Testament, because back in that time it was the divorced woman who was at the bottom of the heap.
Yeah.
So God devised a system to protect them. And I think what we tend to forget when we talk about the market is that the market itself has no values. It's only the people within the market actors who have the values. And the Bible very strongly points to the need for us always to be caring for those who are at the bottom of the heap. So there's nothing wrong with us making a lot of money, nothing wrong with us being highly profitable in business or being a highly paid actor or sports star. But biblically speaking, it's not just for ourselves. It is never only about the individual. It is also about community.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that about caring about the little person or whatever the needy is. I heard a stat, and I can't remember what exact number it was, but there's actually a very, very, very small percentage of actors that are like small percentage of members of the SAG-AFTRA thing that actually earn enough to earn a full-time wage, like a very small percentage of them. And then obviously there's a much smaller percentage of them that are making the 10, 20, $30 million a movie or a year or that kind of thing. I think that like you're right, because to go back to my point that I was sharing is, are they asking for too much? It makes it pretty hard when an actor is used to earning $30 million a year, $30 million from a movie, and then they know that they're going to make, or they make $20 million for the movie, and they know they're going to make $10 million on royalties and stuff like that. So the challenge is it's all well and good to demand $30 million if you're making the studio $500 million or $100 million or whatever. Like that's fair, right? Like, fine, if you're the big name, if you're the draw, if you're the reason why people are turning up, be paid your thing. But if you're expecting to be paid $30 million because you've always earned $30 million, I think that's where, I'm using a big figure, but it can be, if you're used to, if you're trying to earn $100,000 a year, but the money just isn't there in movies anymore. People aren't going to the cinema like they used to. People aren't, like, there's not the advertising money in movies and in TV and everything like that, right? So I just kind of feel like, obviously, I think both sides are at fault and both sides are trying to make their own, trying to protect their own interests, and that's fine. Like, it's business. That's what you got to do. Like, and if you're an actor, if you don't feel like that contract is right for you, don't sign it, right? Like, but I think that if you get caught up in wanting what you've always gotten, you're going to get a rude awakening. I kind of feel like you're going to get a surprise because the money just isn't there. It might not be there anymore, but just because of the way things have changed. But interesting to take on that. And is there anything else you want to share before we move on? Because I don't feel like we've really summed up, but there was a lot of little things that we spoke about along the way.
It's very complex, of course. But I think you've summed it up fairly well. And I guess the only other point I want to reiterate is that, listen, guys, if you're a Christian, any Christian, let alone Christian in leadership, you just got to understand God is our provider. And who are we going to trust? The studio? Or are we going to trust God?
And God is the provider, not us. So as we're leading our people, we're responsible for them, but we shouldn't take on that role of God to be, I'm providing for these people. So no, you're not. Like, God's providing through you. So yes, very good point, Dr. Rob.
The only other thing I would add as a practical thing, if you get paid $30 million for a movie, don't live a $30 million a year lifestyle.
Oh, 100%. Yes. Yes.
Man, you just, you need to apply a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
And I could speak a long time about this because I've talked with a lot of people over the years about this kind of thing. It's very difficult in industries where income fluctuates a lot. You tend to live at the level of your highest income, but that's not wise in the long term.
That's actually a really good point, especially for business leaders, because business fluctuates from month to month, and it can
Absolutely.
And it's very easy as a business owner to go, I earned this much this month, so that average that out over the year, we make this much a year, but you don't, not always. No. So yeah, there's some true, incredible wisdom. You guys heard it here, right? That's why I have this guy with me. He has so much wisdom for me, and yeah, I'm just sharing him with you guys. I hope you appreciate that. Thank you, Dr. Rob, for your wisdom. I'm going to skip the next article because we've spent a lot of time talking about a few other things. I'm going to skip the next article and go straight to our fourth article. Yash, if I can get you to share your screen, because it's that one that I wanted you to play, because I actually want to play a little bit of this video, because I think it's really important that, we as leaders can quite often find ourselves in a disagreement, an argument, so to speak. And I believe that how we carry ourselves as leaders not only represents our character, but also represents our God. And I think that's one thing we need to remember as leaders is we're not just leading to achieve something, we're leading to represent God. And so part of my challenge to you is you are going to be challenged. People are going to come at you with different things. It's how you respond that'll really set you apart. And I came across this video. Actually, I want to give a shout out to Daily Dose of Wisdom. I love the stuff that he does great research to find some really good articles and reacts to the videos. I didn't play his video now. I'm playing the original video, but I didn't link him in below. Yash, can you make a note we'll link Daily Dose of Wisdom down below in this one. So the reason why I didn't play his is because his is a reaction video, and I didn't want to play a reaction to a reaction to a reaction, right? I thought it'd be a little bit too meta for us. But the original video came from crossexamined.org, or actually, if you just look on YouTube, it's cross-examined. And it's from a gentleman called Frank Turek. And he's being challenged at a lecture by an atheist, and challenge him on the existence of God and everything like that. And I want to just play this out, just the first interaction and the first question and the first answer. And if you want to watch the rest of it, the link is below. I encourage you. It's actually really good information. As a Christian, you should know this stuff so that you can, defend your faith, but also you can learn how to effectively respond to challenges or to tough questions. Yash, if I can get you to play that for me, please.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hello, my name is Carter.
Hey, Carter.
And
I'm going to stop there.
Yash.
Stop right there, Yash. Do you notice what happened? What was the first thing he asked? Now, he's in a lecture and he knows that there's people coming up, and all these people, most of them are coming up to challenge him with his views. But the first thing he did was ask for the person's name, and then not only did he just ask for the person's name, he actually used the person's name. And I think that this really shows respect. And I think that's one key thing we need to remember when we're being challenged in leadership. Things don't always go right. We do have people against us. We do have people that may hate us. We can still respect them. Even when we're being wronged by, we can still respect them. And I think this goes a long way to just show his character, but also show a really great way of being able to show respect for someone is, yeah, we're in a disagreement, but we can be cordial. I can be professional. I can be courteous and use your name. Hit it again, Yash. Thank you.
Offensive moral law argument that without God as an objective moral standard, we atheists, those who do not have the influence of theism, would be Hitler-esque amoral beings.
Okay, let me stop right there because that's not the case. I never said that atheists can't be moral. I never said atheists don't know morality. In fact, atheists know morality just like everybody else. We know morality because it's written on our hearts. What I'm saying is that atheists can't justify morality. That's the point. In fact, I had to say this several times to Christopher Hitchens. Christopher, I'm not saying you're a bad guy. Christopher, I'm not saying you don't know morality. In fact, I like Christopher. I thought he was a good guy. What I'm saying is you can't justify why not murder innocent people to get what you want. That's the point. It's a point about ontology,
Okay,
not a point about
there.
epistemology.
Stop there, Yash. So you can actually see in this point is he has his response here. The person, the atheist, was challenging him and challenging him with something in factual that he said, and he jumped on it right away. He did it forcefully, but he did it respectfully. Whereas, like, hold on a second, that's not correct. I'm gonna correct you. Yash, can I get you to actually skip forward? I think we're actually not at the right spot. Just skip forward a little bit to where he asked the next question. Keep going forward, keep going forward, keep going forward. Yep, sorry, we had to get Yash to. Okay, go back. Yeah, and it's this question. So yes. So the atheist asked the question. Just hit play from there, Yash.
Origins, he as marvelous and precise as God, but be natural causes.
Excellent question, Carter. That's a very good question. You're
So
right.
Stop there.
That we have two options here.
See, one thing that he did there was the Carter. Let's use his name. Carter asked a great question, and actually, I want to give Carter some props too, because I believe this is what lesson we can learn as leaders as well. He was prepared. He had some notes. He actually asked very good questions, very detailed questions. As we said before, he misrepresented one of his quotes, so he corrected him on that. However, in this moment, Frank actually turned around and said, "You know what? That's actually a really good question," and it's one way to kind of defuse an argument is agree with them or support them or encourage them and go, hey, that's a great question, and it'll throw them off and it'll kind of bring a little bit of, balance to the conversation. But let's keep playing it a little bit more. Yash.
Either the universe is the uncaused first cause or something beyond the universe is the uncaused first cause.
I agree.
The problem is that all the evidence points to the fact that the universe is not the uncaused first cause. And I didn't have time to go through that evidence tonight. That was part one. But I'll give it to you very briefly in an acronym, SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. S stands for the second law of thermodynamics, which says that the universe is running down. Well, if it's running down, somebody must have wound it up. We'd have no energy left right now if the universe was eternal. The U stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. Edwin Hubble detected that back in 1929 and shows that everything came from a single point, a point actually of infinite density, the singularity, which is actually nothing. So the universe had a beginning. The R in SURGE stands for the radiation afterglow. That's the remnant heat discovered by Penzias and Wilson in 1965, which is literally the smoking gun to the Big Bang. There's heat, remnant heat from the Big Bang still out there, which shows that the universe had a beginning. The G in SURGE stands for the great galaxy seeds, which were very fine temperature variations in that radiation afterglow that allowed the galaxies to form in the early universe. And the E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity, which shows that time, space, and matter are correlative, that they came into existence together, that space, time, and matter literally had a beginning. Einstein knew this in 1916. Then
That'll do. Thank you. Okay, and you can close that down now, Yash. The last bit I kind of wanted to share from that is he used, in response to a tough question, he was researched, he was prepared, he was knowledgeable, he knew his stuff, but he didn't just speak a bunch of technical gobbledygook. Although there was a little bit of technicality in there, what it is wrapped up in an acronym. And that's one thing we can learn as leaders, is to make sure that we, when communicating any form of information, how can we present it in a way that is more effective? How can we make it easier for people to understand? I remember there was this quote by John C. Maxwell. I saw him speaking at a Hillsong conference, and he was talking about the difference between a teacher and a communicator. He said, well, a teacher takes a simple concept and makes it complex, whereas a communicator actually is able to take something complex and present it in a simple manner so that people can understand. And I think that's one thing that he does here, like being able to, there was a bunch of like Einstein's theory of relativity and this thing and that thing. Like there was so many different theories in there, but he wrapped it up in an acronym that's easy for him to remember, but also easy for the audience to remember, and it's much easier for them to take on board. Dr. Rod, how would you rate, first of all, how he responded to these questions?
He responded well. Frank Turek is one of the best Christian apologists on the planet today, and he's written some material that will help a lot of Christians.
That was the word. I was like, lecturer, like I blanked out. A lecturer,
no, that's
apologist,
okay.
correct.
An apologist is not someone who apologizes for being a Christian or who apologizes for the Bible. Somebody who is ready and able to defend the Bible.
Because it has something, the word apologist comes from, not from the word apology, but from apostolic or from the apostles.
Oh no, it's from the Greek. No, it might be Latin. I think it's Latin. Apologia, which is really about arguing in favor of a position or defending a position. So apologetics is all about defending the beliefs, the attitudes, the values that underpin Christianity. Mm-hmm. Frank Turek is one of the best. Mm-hmm. And I think one of his strengths in that interaction was that he never took on the person. He focused on the idea. So he affirmed the person Carter, but then he actually focused on ideas. When he said to Carter, that was a good question, that wasn't really just a communication technique. No. I believe he was genuine in that because it was a good question.
Yep.
And it's a question that a lot of people have asked, and it's a question which has driven both science and theology for a long, long time. And Frank Turek, like many other apologists, recognizes that the strength in science is that it helps us understand the what. Whereas we need theology to help us understand the why.
That's good.
Why are we here? Really what are we supposed to do while we're here? Where do we go when this life is all over?
So science is the what, religion is the why.
Effectively, that's a simple way of putting it. We benefit greatly from science. But sort of focusing on Frank Turek here, I think his strength is, so when you recall somebody's name, when you use somebody's name, you're recognizing them.
Yes.
That's a Christian thing to do because every single human being is created by and loved by God. So as a Christian leader, it's a good, I guess this is a little bit of an aside, but one of my habits whenever I'm on the telephone to a business or a government department or whatever, they're usually trained now to say, good afternoon, my name is Bill, my name is Linda, whatever it happens to be. I write it down as soon as I hear it. I usually have a pad in front of me.
Agreed.
I write it down so I can use their name during the conversation. And I always like to finish my conversation by saying, thank you, Bill, or thank you, Linda, whatever the name happens to be, because no matter what the issue, you're actually recognizing that they are people,
100%.
an individual person. And I think that's important to God, and it needs to be important to us as Christian leaders. But the other thing, which is really, really important in the context that we're speaking about here, Frank Turek focused on ideas. So he didn't, and he doesn't want anybody to feel that he believes they're an idiot.
Yes.
He doesn't even say you're wrong.
No.
He says, good question. And then he provides an answer which appeals to the science, because this really is a question about what happened in the beginning.
In the beginning, yeah.
You see, now, as an apologist speaking to an audience of mainly atheists, there's no point in taking out your Bible, waving it in the air and say, Genesis 1:1 says in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay? No point.
Yep.
No point. Because they don't hold the Bible in the same esteem that we do as Christians.
And on that point, that's actually a really good point that I like to emphasize with people is, like, for us, this is a very, very reputable reference. And, you know, I liken it to my master's and my university degree. We always need to reference an authority source, right? And I remember when I first started university, they challenged us with like, there's good quality references and there's poor quality references. You know, you can, if you just get something off the internet, it's not a good reference. Well, that was when I first did my degree. When I did my master's, it was a lot more common to just give us the URL. It's fine. You know, like things have changed. But it's the same with this. For us, this is like, I can say First Peter 4:10, whatever. And someone goes, okay, that's in the Bible, it's valid, right? Whereas if you don't believe that this book is the original truth, is the source, is breathed by and inspired by God, then if I bring this up, it's almost like me quoting BuzzFeed to you. You know, like it doesn't matter. And so what he does is, who does he quote? Einstein. Who are the other few people in there? Like he quoted non-Christian, you know, authors or experts.
Well, he quoted scientists because some of these people, Einstein had a faith, probably not quite the same as ours, but he definitely did. He quoted Hubble and a few others as well. But his appeal was to well-recognised, well-accepted scientific research.
Yes.
Because what he's driving at the end of the day is science cannot answer the question of how or who started it all.
Yeah.
Science can get us to the point which says everything came from nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. And theology says, well, that really isn't good enough.
Yeah.
Because it cannot really give us identity. It cannot give us purpose. Theology gives us purpose by saying, well, it all points ultimately to the fact that behind what we call the Big Bang was a Big Banger. And that's not original on my part. That's Greg Kukul, I think, is the first person I heard that from, who's another very fine apologist as well. So yeah, this guy, Frank Turek, I think he sets us a really good example as Christian leaders, especially when we're called upon to defend our faith. And that could happen anytime.
Yes.
For leaders, it can happen anytime, in any interaction, even inside the church, because, you know, people are still wondering, exploring, they're still trying to sort of weigh up. So where do I fit science and biblical doctrine together? How does it all fit together?
Yeah, he does a good job of that. And so all our links are below, so go and check that out. I as a scientist myself, I studied science at university. I find it very amusing that you are either a scientist or you're a Christian. It's kind of like it's one or the other. It's like, actually, no, when I was learning science, everything was just, I saw science as just discovering the makeup of the universe. And everything in science, I felt just pointed back to a creator. Like if you can look at science and look at anything in science is a formula, it's a set, it's been studied and found that this particle does this thing always and is linked with, like, there's formulas and everything like that. It just proves that there's no accident. It just proves that with the way that there was a creator that actually planned out every small, minute detail. And so that when you're doing science, you are literally discovering God in the process and getting to understand and know a little bit more about him. It's kind of like his little fingerprints. I kind of see it. That's my take. But you're kind of going back to, Frank Turek is as leaders, we are going to have to face times where we have to respond to tough situations. As a little bit of a side note, go and check out the video so that if you're challenged on your faith, you're a little bit more educated on being able to respond as to people asking about Big Bang or, well, where did everything start? Did it really happen in 7 days? And like all that sort of stuff. You should know that. You should know why you believe that, not just blindly believing it. It's great that you got faith in it, but research it to strengthen your faith. But when you're in an interaction that is a little bit argumentative, that it is maybe a clash of ideas, remember you're clashing ideas, not people. Like Dr. Rod said, that you can challenge ideas but never make it personal. Never do a personal attack. Always respect the person that you're communicating with, respect and honor them, use their name, appreciate their questions, like just show appreciation. Like those things that Frank did are such a great example of how we can be better leaders in the face of a challenging situation. Let's get on to talking about the Bible and defending the Bible and everything like that. Let's go to the Bible. Let's do our last segment of leadership lessons from Luke, and we're going to be talking about the parable of the sower. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but Jesus is out. He's traveling around. He shares this parable about the farmer went out to sow his seed and scattered around and blah blah blah. There's a lot in that I kind of wanted to go into. I'm like, no, that's a whole sermon. But I want to focus on, one part of like the second part of verse 8. When he said this, he called out, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. In verse 9, his disciples are, I don't even think I said the verse. Luke 8, verse 8b, when he said this, he called out, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Then verse 9, his disciples asked him what this parable meant. He said, the knowledgeable of the secrets of the kingdom of God, the knowledge, my reading's terrible today. The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of God has been given to you, but to others I speak in parables, so that though seeing, they may not see, though hearing, they may not understand. And I think that this is one big lesson. This is part of one of the keys that we speak about. Is this my first shameless plug today? Shameless plug for our free leadership development program. Link down in description. Go and check it out. We start out by helping you discover your purpose and as a person and your calling, so then you can step out and manage to lead through your purpose and help other people discover their purposes as well. But this is one of the key principles that we talk about in this is when we communicate, we need to know who we're communicating to at what time. Going back to kind of what Frank did is he kind of gave examples and everything like that, but he shared some of those stories because some people are just there for a show. And so he shared a story so that people would be entertained with a story. Because there's some people that are just there for a show. Other people are there to actually learn. And so I think we need to be aware as leaders that sometimes, most of the time, not everyone is there to actually learn from you, to actually listen to you, to actually hear what you have to say. Although they have ears, they don't hear. Although they see, they don't actually see it. And so one of the key things is just knowing who you're communicating to and you know how to communicate to them. If you're communicating to people that just don't get it, you can't force it. That's why I love using metaphors, right? I've used metaphors for as long as I can remember. And that's why I use these news articles for us to share, because it's like, here's a little bit of a story for you to kind of attach a bit of a metaphor so you can kind of get it if you get the general concept. Now, there are a lot of people that watch this that they have ears, but they don't hear, right? We get so many negative comments below about people having a go at a single thing that we said or the actual topic and having a go at a negative leader that we maybe talking about at the time. And it's really interesting. Like, those people, they just don't see it, right? Have you ever had that conversation with people that they just don't get it? They just don't get it. And, as Einstein, well, I don't even know if it's Einstein, but it's been credited to Einstein. He said, if you're arguing with a stupid person, it makes two, right? So sometimes it's not worth getting into it, right? So when we're communicating, know who we're communicating to. Be able to filter and balance your communication to who you're communicating to. That's what Jesus said here. He goes, I speak in parables to these people because they just want to hear a story. So they're not going to actually understand it. But I'm going to teach you, my disciples, because you have open hearts, you've got open minds, and you're ready and willing to learn. That's kind of my challenge to you as leaders, is make sure that when you're communicating to people, know, where do these people fit? Are they just simple observers? Are they? Do I need to teach them a little bit more? Do I just share an anecdote? What is it that I do? Because how you communicate, it should differ to who you're communicating with. Dr. Rod, what's your take on that verse?
Oh, I agree with everything you said. It's as simple as that. It's a great parable, or if you like, metaphor, a story that Jesus used to make a point. And the point was simply this: people receive and process news, information, communication differently. In the context of this particular parable, the difference among the hearers was the state of their heart. And you've alluded to the fact some people will come to a lecture or a meeting or some interaction with varying levels of engagement. Some people are ready, willing, and able to engage. Other people they're just not, for whatever reason, at the point where they really want to engage. So they may give the appearance of hearing, but they're not really processing anything. They're not actively listening, and they certainly have no intention of allowing the communication to change the way in which they think or behave. Now, as a communicator, you may be able to do something about that, because, as you've already said, the way in which you communicate needs to adjust depending on the people that you're communicating with. And look, as a lecturer, I've been lecturing for over 40 years now, and you know that some people come into your classroom, they're not the least bit interested.
Yeah.
There are some who are even less interested than that. They don't come at all. And I guess we've made it easy with digital communication now. We can record our lecture even if nobody's there. And to tell you the truth, I have done that. I have recorded a lecture. Nobody in the class turned up, but there it was put up on the learning management system. And if students wanted to, they could come and watch later on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so look, Jesus was very wise, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know that. And I think this is a great parable because the lesson we learn as leaders who are trying to communicate is that, our audience isn't made up of people who are all the same. And maybe we do need different ways of communicating. And really, the parable is about the state of the heart
Yes.
of the receiver. We do need to be aware of that as leaders who are trying to communicate.
Yeah, I kind of skipped over that bit because I wanted to just jump to that verse, but he talks about the sower sowing seed in good soil and bad soil and short soil. Some, the weeds choke it up and all that. Like, there's all these things. Understand that it's not just people willing to receive and people not willing to receive. I think that there's another thing that I want to emphasize to leaders is, if this parable says that sometimes people hear and they love it, but they get caught up with the worries of life. You as a leader, that thing that you're communicating is the most important thing to you in your world. But understand that other people are going through their own stuff. People have things going on that they may hear, they may agree, you may have people that are at work, that are working for you, and you're trying to help them, you're trying to get them to perform, but you don't know, like maybe they're having issues at home with their wife, maybe their kids are sick, maybe we don't know what's actually going on in people's worlds. Sometimes you may give them instructions and then they go away. Oh, I gotta tell you right now, I am getting my own slap in the face for this because I just thought about a time that I just spoke to one of my team. I gave them feedback about something that was a little bit abrupt, and I'm just now challenging myself. Like, you know what? I don't know what they're going through. I don't actually know what they're going through. I don't know where they're at, and I just gave them some negative feedback and kind of grumpily gave them negative feedback about something. Maybe I wasn't at my best as a leader, but we don't know what they're going through in their own life that's causing them to negatively or poorly perform. So kind of going back to that original thing that Dr. Rod and I spoke about was about relationship. It's important as leaders that to communicate with people through relationship, understanding that sometimes people just aren't interested. Some people are, but they're distracted and they've got other things going on in the world. Just remember, I think we need to be empathetic with where people are at and be able to communicate to them effectively. I think that's a great point, great place for us to wrap up. This has been a great podcast. So thank you for watching. If you've watched all the way through, well done. Give us a thumbs up to give yourself a thumbs up, right? Because you've watched all the way through here. So thank you for taking the time to watch through. Look, we'd love for you to place a comment below. Yeah, obviously that it helps the algorithm. And hey, if you've enjoyed anything that we've shared and want to see more of this, consider subscribing so you can see, be notified when there's, hit the notification bell and doing all that stuff. You know the deal, but just at least consider subscribing to our channel. It'd be an honor to have you as part of our community that we are sharing more and more, taking from everyday news and learning how we can be better leaders. Dr. Rod St. Hill, the businessman's pastor. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and advice and experience with us today.
It's been a great pleasure.
Awesome. So bless you, Dr. Rod. Bless you, Yash, in the background that's flicking all our buttons. And bless you, and thank you for taking the time to watch. And we look forward to seeing you next time.